It's Mark again. I didn't expect that last story I wrote here to explode like that, but I actually received 5 comments. That's a new record for me, and I'd be happy to answer your questions before I tell you more about the nursing home where I work. One of you wanted to know if I was just making all of this up, or if I'm on drugs. No, XX Slayer XX. I'm not making it all up, and the only drug I consume is coffee. Ghost Stories with Nellie asked, what happened to Maria and Mr. Damas, and how our home explained their disappearances. You also wanted to know if they were the only ones that night. I find out on the following Monday that Maria was recorded as another suicide victim. They found her in Mr. Damas' room with a broken neck. Mr. Damas was officially said to have died from a stroke. That must have been the reason why Maria called me that night, but I'll probably never know for sure. And yes, they were the only ones taken that night. User Simon_Alabak wants to know if I'm a Christian trying to convert you all to Christianity. No, I'm not. If you want to know, I'm an atheist and don't believe in the existence of a God. However, I must admit that, especially after the last incident, my beliefs in this regard have been a little shaken, as one of the recent comments just makes fun of me. I won't address it here, but thanks to Beatrice von Canal, you're right. The whole thing is very mysterious, and I'm glad you like it. Alright, with that out of the way, I can imagine you're eager to know how things went for me after I landed in hell, not just metaphorically. Well, I came home that day, and my wife was quite surprised that I was back so early. I told her I was sent home because I wasn't feeling well, and went straight to bed. I had already mentioned that I can't talk to her about these events. Unfortunately, she's very sensitive in that regard, and already gets nightmares when I simply tell her about dealing with dementia patients. Just imagine what would happen if I told her about the leathery creatures throwing one of my colleagues and one of my patients into a river of lava, and then chasing me all over the facility. For the rest of the week, I mostly tried to suppress the whole thing by turning on my PlayStation 4 after a long time and immersing myself in Final Fantasy 15. What I did during the week, especially with my wife, is none of your business. When I returned to work on Monday, nobody asked why I'd been given time off or how my short vacation was. Everything went on as if nothing unusual had happened. I tried to bring the subject up with Geraldine, one of the other night nurses, but she looked as if I'd grown a second head and recommended that I see a psychiatrist. I also tried to schedule a meeting with Miss Wheeler, our facilities director, so I could confront her, but I was blocked again. Her secretary told me that Miss Wheeler had instructed her to turn me up and reminded me that I signed a confidentiality agreement. Everything I see, hear, or experience falls under it, and if I didn't accept that, I should take a look at my paycheck. You should know that I work in a facility operated by a private organization, a very wealthy private organization. We always have the latest equipment, and our facility is always up to date with technology. Well, except for the phone system, which apparently nobody considers important. I did as instructed and checked my paycheck at the end of the month, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Sure, my salary was already quite high, especially for someone who hadn't had their exam for a year. But on this paycheck, I found a €10,000 bonus, labelled as hazard pay. What was more surprising was that none of my colleagues seemed to be able to see that line on my paycheck. When I showed them my paycheck, they just looked at me with confusion and then asked if I was making a bad joke. I didn't know what to make of it. Either I was losing my mind, or there was something wrong with my paycheck. And by the way, the money was in my account. The full amount. My wife spent a good portion of it, buying herself a new computer for her Twitch channel. I wasn't thrilled about it, but when she wants something, which doesn't happen often, I can rarely refuse her. I gave up. The job was too good to simply quit, and it allowed my wife and me to save up some money, so I continued working there and kept an eye out for further unusual events. It turned out I didn't have to wait long. Just about a month after the last incident, I was assigned to the early shift, and we were informed we'd be getting a new resident. I looked at the file and groaned inwardly. According to it, the new resident was classified as a level 5 care, completely blind, suffering from auditory hallucinations, completely immobile, and to top it all off, he was also a convicted criminal. His offense was not mentioned in the file, but I already knew it had to be either murder or a sexual crime, since these were typically only cases where someone's criminal background was mentioned. I treated all my patients equally, as that's what we learned in training, but I must admit, it was always a bit difficult to do so with someone who had caused harm to another person. It's just something about being human, and we human are social creatures. When someone harms the group, well, they usually don't receive the best treatment. Normally, around noon, the new resident was brought to us, and I could already hear him long before the people from the ambulance brought him out of the elevator. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, even though he had been sedated according to the ambulance drivers. Don't get me wrong, I like most of my residents, and I understand that even difficult residents usually can't help the difficulty of their care, as it's often due to their medical condition. But that doesn't mean I sometimes don't wish we didn't have any level 5 residents. Dealing with them often left me physically and emotionally drained. Mr. Kowalski was very old, and his care was, as expected, very challenging. He tried to help as much as he could, but it wasn't much. On top of that, he kept screaming. He would apologize for making a mistake and beg to be left alone. Only when I raised my voice to be louder than his hallucinations would he calm down and thank me. I tried to find out from his family what his crime had been, but they refused to tell me. His son said would only tell me once his father was dead, so that my care for him wouldn't be influenced by that knowledge. And so the days and weeks went by. Everything went on as usual, and I regularly switched between the day and the night shifts. However, since Mr. Kowalski moved in, the night shift was no longer as peaceful, quite the opposite. Many residents complained about his screams, but there was nothing I could do about it. He was already receiving the maximum dose of Trivar to calm him down, but he was so used to it that he would only sleep for 2 to 3 hours at most. Then, it happened. About 3 weeks after he moved, I had another night shift. This night, however, didn't go as expected. At first, everything seemed normal, and I made my rounds, trying to calm down Mr. Kowalski again and again. Sometimes it worked temporarily, but most of the time, my efforts were in vain. But this night, I didn't just hear his voice coming from his room. It sounded as if a whole shooting club was yelling at each other in his room. It wasn't uncommon for family members to sneak into the nursing home after visiting ours to see their relatives, but this sounded just horrifying. I couldn't allow it. So what did I do? Well, what would anyone do? Without knocking, as I usually did, I stormed the room and demanded that the people go home, or else I would call the police. I was not prepared for what I found.
Okay, folks, it's almost 3 o'clock.
I started, but my voice got stuck in my throat. The room was full, up to the ceiling, and I don't mean that figuratively. No, we're literally stacked up, reaching the ceiling. Surprisingly, I could still see the bed where Mr. Kowalski lay, as these figures didn't seem entirely substantial. I could see through them, but there were so many of them that it blocked my view of the other end of the room. As soon as I entered the room, they stopped yelling at him, and all their faces turned towards me. Only then did I notice the people's clothing was old-fashioned, and they looked like they hadn't eaten anything for days. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I ran for my life, rushed into the duty room and locked the door behind me. Maybe I screamed like a little girl on the way there. I won't confirm or deny it. Make up your own mind. Around 5 o'clock, it became quiet again. I couldn't hear any screams anymore. Those 2 hours were the worst of my life up until that point, and I spent them crouched in a corner of the room with earplugs in my ears and the music of my phone turned up to max. Believe me, I'm really not proud of it. I waited a few more minutes to be absolutely sure it was over before going on my next rounds. First, I checked on Mr. Kowalski, and I immediately saw that he was dead. His face was contorted in an expression of pure fear. His hands were reaching up to the sky. Later, I would learn that he died of a heart attack. The time of the death was between 4 and 5 in the morning. His relatives came fairly quickly to collect his belongings, and his son took me aside.
Do you still want to know what my father did?
He asked, as we stood in the small laundry room of the ward. I confirmed that I did.
You can probably already imagine. My father came from Poland. He was always a coward, and when the Nazis invaded, he became a collaborator. Many Polish Jewish people trusted him and asked for his help to leave the country. As a truck driver, he could have made it possible for them, so he took their money and promised to get them out of the country. Instead, he betrayed them to the Nazis. The whole operation was so well organized that only those involved knew about it, and so the Jewish community never became suspicious, as their members apparently had found a trustworthy smuggler. He never told our mother about it, but a few years ago I found his diary. Unfortunately, she didn't survive the war, and never learned that he was sentenced to prison for his actions. We lived with our grandparents during the 10 years he was incarcerated, and even then, they never told us about his deeds. If you ask me, the Allies should have shot him dead.
He said more, but that's not relevant here. It seemed to do him good to finally tell someone the story of his father. It was heartbreaking to see a man who was already approaching 80 burst into tears and could hardly contain himself.